The member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And these bills and the budget they underpin are consistent with the style and substance of this government now into its third term after 8 years at the wheel. And they're consistent with the style and substance because it continues to show lazy and inept economic management. No appetite for tackling important reform, no capability in some cases for even simple administrative competence when it comes to facing up to immediate challenges. The government will tries to pretend every day in this place and out in the public domain that the only frame of reference is the last 12 months, and they will point to figures in the early part of Australia's economic recovery which are positive because they're part of a rebound from a savage decline. They'll point to those positive numbers as if the previous 8 years never happened, as if all of that lazy and inept economic mismanagement never happened. But the reality is pretty clear, and I think the Australian people see that. I mean, this Liberal National Government was elected on the basis of what they described as a debt and deficit emergency, and what they have achieved is eye-watering levels of debt, now $1 trillion, without anything to show for it. It's triple the debt that they inherited, and despite what they will do in seeking to lay that all at the feet of the COVID-19 pandemic, they had already doubled that debt before the pandemic occurred. That debt now stands at $40,000 for every single person in Australia. And it's entirely fair for people in the Australian community to ask what is there to show for that eye-watering debt, and the answer is very, very little. I mean, unfortunately, this government's approach to economic management has been a sort of a version of the magic pudding, or the anti-magic pudding. They've racked up this incredible debt mountain, and yet they've delivered nothing in terms of meaningful reform. It's a bad magic pudding. If it's any kind of magic pudding, it's a bad magic pudding. It's definitely not a back in the black magic pudding. It's the magic upside down cake. You know, they've borrowed all of this money, which will be the responsibility of Australian households to deal with in future, and yet what lasting reform or broad public benefit have we got for it? Absolutely nothing. People will remember that the government bought the self-congratulatory back in black mugs when they pretended that they'd secured a surplus that would occur in the future. Yeah, the mugs did turn up, the surplus never arrived. So, you know, the reality is they're taking the Australian people for mugs. They have taken the Australian people for mugs over and over again. And if they can get away with it, if they can keep getting away with it, they will. They can keep telling porkies to the Australian people and getting away with it, they will. Labor governments take a different approach. You know, one of the things Labor governments seek to do is improve the broad circumstances for the Australian population over the long.
The member for Fremantle in continuation.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. And it appears I get to have the last word in this debate on the budget bills, but really the last word should go to the Australian people, and I think that they will sit in judgment on the budget, and they're right to ask, what does $1 trillion in debt do for them, other than saddle them with $40,000 that needs to be repaid in the future. I mean, they didn't get the back in black mugs. They didn't get to see the budget brought back into black. It has been tripled under this government's watch, and it's entirely legitimate for people to expect from good government that when that amount of borrowing occurs, that they see something for it. And in the past, good government, good Labor governments have in instalments taken us further down the path of progress and egalitarianism and improved shared well-being through the age pension, through the creation of Medicare, through the creation of superannuation and paid parental leave and the National Environmental Estate and the National Disability Insurance Scheme. All of those things have been delivered as incremental foundation stones of greater egalitarianism, fairness and shared wellbeing in this country. From the Howard government, the Australian people got improved gun laws, and that was meaningful reform, and the GST, which is a regressive tax that impacts people on low and middle income earners more than it impacts people at the other end of the spectrum. And I think we'd be wanting to watch this government very closely, because I can tell you one thing that happens when a government goes down the path, the neoliberal path of giving tax breaks away to big corporates and high income earners, is they create an enduring structural revenue problem they need to fix. And one of the ways that governments like that around the world have sought to fix that is by increasing consumption taxes. So I haven't actually heard from the government, the Treasurer or any of the government members, a commitment that they will not seek to increase the GST in future. And if I was a member of the Australian community, I'd be very, very concerned that that is in prospect, because that's what neoliberal governments do. When you think about the examples of challenges that remain to be addressed, you know, one of the things about government is you've got this great opportunity to turn the wheel in a positive direction, to create greater fairness and sustainability in the way that we live in Australia. And there are plenty of examples for that to do. You know, it's not like you have to cast around and say, what on earth could we do with all of this debt that would make a positive difference? At a time of parching, drought and the worst bushfires Australia has experienced from this government, no action on climate change and insufficient preparation for extreme bushfire events. At a time when we face an extinction crisis, when we are a world leader in the extinction of mammal species in particular, there has been nothing. There's been 40% cuts to the Department of Environment. There are 170 threatened and endangered species for which there are no recovery plan. The government's threatened species strategy, which came to a conclusion recently, was a failure. It never included any marine species. If you take one of the target areas where they set out to try to deliver improved trajectories for 20 of the most endangered mammal species, they were only able to achieve an improved population trajectory for 4 of the 20. Now, they claimed that they'd delivered an improved trajectory for 8 of the 20, but of those 8, 4 of them, the improved trajectory was improved to the extent that the decline was slower. So there are fewer and fewer of the animals. They're just not declining at quite the same rate as before. That is what this government has done in an area of environmental crisis. We know in the aftermath of the bushfires that the delivery of support for affected communities has been utterly hopeless. They put $4 billion aside and they haven't managed to get a dollar out the door to the people whose houses burned down, whose properties were razed, who lost stock and business opportunities and all of those kinds of things. We know that we live in a time when we need to improve productivity and we need to improve innovation. But what has this government done? It's cut funding to universities. It has totally abandoned the university sector, thrown its workforce to the wolves, and undermined research capacity in this country. I mean, you could hardly get a more backward-minded approach to one of the great economic challenges we have around productivity than that. In the area of energy, you know, we need to increase storage capacity. We need to increase grid function, grid reliability as we move to a distributed form of energy generation. We have pretty much the best wind and solar resources on the planet. You go anywhere else in the world and they look at what we have in that respect with envy. We have proven energy metal resources. We should be a renewable energy superpower. But again, this government hasn't even been content to just leave things as they were. They're never going to take things forward. They're never going to take positive steps with the best interests of the Australian community at the foundation of those kinds of reforms. But it would be nice if they just left the relatively good things that had been done in the past alone. But they haven't. They allow the renewable energy target to elapse. They seek to abolish and defund ARENA and the CEFC at every turn. If they can't abolish or defund it, they seek to pervert those agencies so that even though their purpose is clearly focused on renewable energy, that somehow they should be enabled to focus to invest in coal and gas and, God forbid, even nuclear. They've taken, as part of their kind of debt bonanza, they've taken $600 million in taxpayers' funds, which they're now going to apply to a gas plant that none of the regulators say is necessary or that will ever operate or that will have any effect other than to raise energy prices and certainly emissions. They won't show the business case for that, but they're happy to pour another $600 million of yours down the chute. When it comes to the experience of ordinary Australians, we're living through a prolonged period of falling real wages. Again, the government's done nothing on the positive side. They have actively sought to undermine wages in this country. They were happy to support the cut to penalty rates. They've put in place a public sector wage freeze. Those things have the effect of making wages drop further. That affects all Australians all the time. They're not content with that. They're going to try to stymie superannuation. They're presently having a go at industry superannuation funds in particular, which of course are the most effective and successful superannuation funds for working Australians. In response to the Royal Commission, an area that is crying out for a government to grasp the nettle and do something positive, Deputy Speaker, the government was in possession of the Royal Commission report into aged care, titled Neglect, a third of residents malnourished, overuse and over-reliance on chemical restraints. Simply, at the end of the day, not enough hours of care for older Australians to give older Australians the dignity and quality of life and human engagement that they need and that they absolutely deserve. The government has an opportunity to do something about that, but they have squibbed that challenge and they've ignored many of the recommendations. They've particularly ignored the needs of the workforce. It does not take a genius to understand that the best and most appropriate, compassionate and professional and properly resourced and properly enabled care in residential care centres comes from our aged care workforce, and yet they're among the lowest paid workers in Australia, and they suffer from uncertain work or insecurity of work. They're required to work across multiple centres, and the COVID-19 pandemic has put an additional magnifying glass over the top of that, showing not only how that delivers utterly unacceptable circumstances for aged care residents and the people who care for them, but also creates additional COVID risks. The government could have done something to improve wages for aged care workers and enable aged care workers to do what they are drawn to do vocationally, and by their commitment to older Australians, enable them to have the time to provide the care that we would all want for each other, that we would all want for our family members, and that those people should have as essentially a basic human right. The government has done nothing about that. They've poured money into the system in a way that we can have no confidence will find its way to the workforce. So, Deputy Speaker, in the end, the Australian people need to ask themselves what they really expect from the Morrison government. What do they expect from the Morrison government going forward? If they expect more debt that will fall on them and their families, they're not going to be disappointed, because that's the record of this government and that's what this government will continue to deliver. If they expect more economic hogwash about tax cuts gifted to profitable and multinational big businesses flowing through in wages, if they expect more of that rubbish, they won't be disappointed. There'll be more of that, you can bet on that. If they expect a hands-off approach to protecting the things we share, the most important things, our public health and education system, our aged care system, our environment, our workplace conditions, if you expect them to take a hands-off approach to those things and to letting them deteriorate or to actively running them down, you will not be supported. You will not be disappointed, because that's the record of the Morrison government, and that's what they've done in every one of the 8 years that they've been behind the wheel. If you expect more waste, more rorts, more money, your money, taxpayers' money, spent buying overpriced land from Liberal mates or put into ridiculous boondoggles like the Kurri Kurri gas plant, you won't be disappointed. That's what they've done every year. That's what they'll continue to do. If you expect the NBN to continue to be run badly, with us falling further and further down the global broadband speed league tables, that will happen. All those things, all of them, can be depended upon. That's what this government has produced day in, day out. That's the story of this budget, Deputy Speaker. It's an instalment of economic mismanagement and social and environmental neglect that is entirely consistent with the style and substance of the Abbott-Turnbull-Morrison ... government, now into its 8th year, now into its 3rd term, focused on nothing other than manipulating and spinning and fear-mongering its way into another term. Don't let them do it here. Don't let them do it to Australia.